Are you ready for an open discussion with the best of the best and the best of what's next? Welcome to the Tony DUrso Show. Join in on a great conversation today with some of the world's great influencers as they showcase great advice and techniques that made them the game changers they are today. Now, here's Tony DUrso.
Welcome, and thanks for joining in with us. You're listening to our routine millionaires and billionaires to soak in all that advice and wisdom that they share. And you're an entrepreneur at heart. You want to grow and you want to do it as fast as possible. Now, you may have a garden or a yard and you may dislike weeds, the topic of today's discussion. Stick with me. This is not about lawn care, but just stick with me, folks. I have a neighbor with a once beautiful front lawn section of pure white rocks, and weeds got into it. Without invitation, by the way, and they took over. And there she is spending all afternoon pulling them out one by one. Now, when done, the rock lawn looked fantastic. So they aren't grown on purpose, and we have to get rid of them when we see them. Okay, you know that. That's the weeds talk. All right, now we're going to give that all a 180-degree twist. We're going to talk about how to grow like a weed with Stu Heinecke. And while we're at it, this is all about helping you and your friends turn your vision into reality. We want to help you get very successful at growing your business to a high sustainable level. Well, meet Stu Heinecke, Hall of Fame nominated marketer, best-selling author, and Wall Street Journal cartoonist. That's really important. I'm serious. That says it all. Let's get into it. Hi, Stu. Welcome to the Tony DUrso Show.
Tony, thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor.
Stu, we're all looking forward to getting our business to grow like a weed, and I really appreciate you spending some time with us. The honor is mine. I just want to just jump right in. I can't wait. You've done so much. I'm a marketer. I've written books on marketer. Here you are, Hall of Fame. I just love it. Hall of Fame nominated. And so the honor really is just all mine. So let me just kind of cut the chatter for a moment and just jump in. Stu, how did it all happen for you?
Well, I was driving down the Santa Monica Freeway many years ago, and it's back when, so many years ago, it's when traffic used to move really fast on those freeways, and so here we're going along, and there's 6 lanes of traffic coming this way and 6 lanes going the other way, so that's 12 lanes of traffic, lots of cars, roaring tires, and in the middle there's a 40-foot wide concrete median. It's all concrete. It's no place for a plant to take root, but of course, we know there were weeds growing out of the cracks, and I happened to notice, and it's something we always see, and it's such I don't know, such a ubiquitous sight. But this time, it really just struck me, because I thought, well, look at this one dandelion that's growing out of the crack. It looked happy. It looked like those happy yellow flowers and the happy seed pods blowing those seeds around, and it just kind of bounced around in the smoggy turbulence and. And it's like, isn't that impressive? Because this thing just landed wherever it landed, and it's making a living. It's running its process. And that's just really, really impressive. And, I was imagining that, obviously it didn't get hung up on, let's say, I don't know, this sucks. Look where I landed. I saw myself as living at the beach. So, instead it was just wherever it landed, it was going to make a go at it. It was going to be fierce about it. It's going to run its process. And I just thought, I hope that because I was kind of a young guy then, I hope I can do that in my business and in my career, because that's a heck of a standard to live up to. But the thing that I drove away with is, I wonder if they have a model, if there's a sort of this unified model that all of the weeds follow, and that is, of course, to grow and to expand and dominate their turf, all the things that they do. Do they have a model? And it turns out they do, and that's what led to the book.
That's really interesting, and I've noticed that. You're right. Here and there, we see beautiful flowers, and they're not just ugly. Weeds, okay, we all know this. Weeds, though we in our mind they're ugly, they're not. There's some beautiful flowers, and some of them are rather medicinal, which is another topic. So here you are, you notice that. And then somewhere along the line, you got this vision of, hey, I could be the weed master. I'm kind of teasing a little. I could do the weed thing. And then you started talking about it, writing books, and so on and so forth. When did that vision kind of coalesce to just roll with that?
Well, I just, so again, that one experience happened many years ago, and I've just been wondering, well, okay, I just observing. And, we cartoonists, we do a good job of observing and sort of, distilling everything down to one quick essence. And so that's what I've been doing. I've just been watching, and I've been noticing what weeds do, how it applies to business. And then I started interviewing, this is when I finally decided this is going to be a book, started interviewing some really impressive people. I mean, some billionaires and some business personalities and a lot of experts in all sorts of fields across business, and actually gardeners and weed scientists. I didn't know there was such a thing, but there is. But I just wanted to find out then, well, and that's a wonderful part of this whole process of writing a book. When you start interviewing people, that's when perspectives really start to coalesce and broaden as well. And so, yeah, I realized we're really on track with this. Weeds really have this model that some of us already follow. And when someone's following the model completely at all levels, those are generally the people who are billionaires. It's really interesting. And when I interviewed, for example, Kathy Ireland, one of the things she said was, I wanted to do this interview because I've felt like a weed my whole life. I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. And I don't know, T. Boone Pickens was another one that I interviewed. Do you remember T. Boone Pickens? I
remember the name, yes. He's a legend. So
in case anyone in the audience doesn't remember him or doesn't know his name, he was the original corporate raider. I believe he was the original one, but he was the one. He was in the news all the time because he was constantly going after hostile takeover bids. I don't know, some of the biggest oil companies in the world. Phillips 66 is one of them. Unocal is another. There were a bunch of them that he would make these runs at, and he did so much of it. So much of what he did was very weed-like. And in fact, I'm sure that the executives at any of these oil companies, when he came calling, by buying up stock, they're probably just saying, geez, what a total weed this guy is. Because he was a total weed.
Absolutely amazing. All right. So you noticed dandelions and weeds on the wall. And by the way, I've driven that Santa Monica Freeway and all the freeways in Southern California for a great many years. And it's startling to see no rain. It's usually dry most of the time. And here are weeds growing out. Okay, so you observe the weed. You got the vision that you can do something, and you got this whole thing. So now the next question is, Stu, are you into this? Are you doing this because you want to be a billionaire? What's the reason behind you doing all this and learning and studying and teaching about growing a business like a weed?
Well, when I write books, I'm not sure I guess that the purpose of writing the books becomes clearer and clearer. And so I don't know that I'm writing the books to become wealthy per se, but I will say that as I wrote the book, and as I run an agency, I run a marketing agency. So as I wrote the book and then went through the editing of it, I started realizing, oh my God, I'm making a lot of mistakes here. Not in the book, but in my business at Prove the Weeds. And so there are a couple, actually what I should do is tell you what their model is, because when you look at it, you just say, that makes sense. And either you're doing it or you're not. If you're not, then you're hampered in your business. And some parts of it, if you're not doing it, then you don't have a business. So that model it's really simple. All of them, although they all come in all shapes and sizes, and they're all over the world, all weeds do the same thing. They all leverage a fierce mindset. I have to come back to that, but a fierce mindset and unfair advantages against collective scale, and then do it according to a process that is both ancient, I mean, it's millions of years old, but able to respond to challenges very, very quickly. That's their secret. That's the whole model of how weeds grow like weeds. But if you think about it, one of those, I mentioned a fierce mindset. You could say a weed mindset. And by the way, I'm not talking about, in case it wasn't obvious, I'm not talking about these weeds, the ones you smoke. I'm talking about, as you said, the weeds that show up in those beautiful rock gardens, uninvited everywhere. And so anyway, so they have this fierce mindset, and then they cultivate force multipliers. I want to go there first, because when you think about, let's say, a dandelion, because everyone has dandelions, everyone's familiar with dandelions. So they've got those seed pods that our kids love to blow because they work so well. Actually, they're beautifully, well, let's say they're geometrically arranged so that they have the greatest possibility of taking flight and going somewhere to put down roots. And then those seeds are meant to fly, and they are beautiful. Pardon me. They are beautiful little flying machines. They're just capable of flying for easily miles. And so they go around, and that's their method of probing every possible opportunity to take root, which is why they took root in the crack in the concrete median and the freeway. But that's why how they do it everywhere. We've seen it everywhere. And they end up finding opportunities that other plants don't. I mean, I think it's significant that there wasn't an apple tree or a petunia growing out of the crack in the concrete, because they don't have what it takes to be a weed, right? They don't have those unfair advantages developed. And there's some of these unfair advantages that weeds have. They're just amazing. Usually it has a lot to do with seeds and seed production and how often they seed, or just this overwhelming amount of seeds, or maybe seeds that fly all over. There's some weed seeds that fly hundreds of miles. So it's no wonder that they spread and gain territory, which I guess would be analogous in business to gaining market share, and that they're just perfectly designed to grow.
We're talking about how to grow like a weed with Stu Heinecke, and you can find him at stuheinecke.com, and I'll spell that StuHeinecke.com, and it's pronounced Stu Heinecke. Did I get that right?
You did. It's almost like Heineken beer. Yeah, perfect.
Very good. All right. Well, this is really interesting on the weeds, and now I know that there's different scaling strategies that can help a business. So let's kind of go into those first, and then we'll talk about maybe the weeds model.
Sure. Well, I think I went into the project. I went into the book intending to write it for anyone in business, but I think the ones that might get the most from it, I might retract this. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud, but I'm thinking the ones that might get the most from it are small business owners, because they've got there's a lot of growth yet to go, or startups, although it's interesting how it applies to franchises. So let me explain that. We are, from birth, we are trained and raised to become self-sufficient. It's the highly prized attribute in our world, in our society. If you're not self-sufficient, you're not going to go anywhere. And so the more self-sufficient you are, the more capable you are. And when you think about entrepreneurs, they're supremely capable people. They deal with the risk. They come up with visions. They make these visions happen. They just kind of fight against the impossible and win. So they're highly self-reliant people. The problem with that is that if you're too self-reliant, it can prevent you from scaling. Here's what I mean. When we grow up, I think one of our first exposures to all of this is when we play musical chairs. So the first time you go through it and the music stops and you go, whoop, well, where's my chair? You realize, wait a minute. Okay, the next time the music stops, I'm watching all these chairs. I'm going to make sure I get one. And you start being self-sufficient. And then we're taught to go to school, get good grades, go to a good university, get a great job, but you can't scale jobs. You can't have 1,000 jobs. And an entrepreneur's job is to, that's probably, anyway, the entrepreneur's function is to scale whatever it is they're building. So we're just naturally drawn to and think in terms of one-to-one leverage. And whenever we do that, we're preventing our business from scaling. So, for example, I'm talking now about the small businesses. So, if you are part of the part of the deliverables that your company offers, sorry, but if you're part of the deliverable stream of whatever it is that your company delivers to clients and customers, then you are the bottleneck. You shouldn't be there. You should be building a team, or you should be outsourcing, but you should not be in the middle of that. And if you are, the more you recognize that you're working at one-to-one leverage, the more you find that there are ways that you should be pulling yourself out, building a team around you, building scale around you, and then building the scale of the business that way. So one of the things I think weeds tell us to do immediately, and this is one of the things that I am definitely stuck in one-to-one leverage. That's one of the things that I pulled from the book really quickly as I was writing it was, oh my God, I'm willing to teach myself anything. I feel like I can do many things better than most like anybody else I can hire, and that's deadly to an entrepreneur. You can't do that. But one of the things that then came out of the book to me, one of the big takeaways was you need to form as many alliances also. So I mentioned building a team, but also, so that would be employees and maybe vendors or other supporters, but you also need to build a network of alliances. And I don't mean just like people you know, but I'm saying people that you collaborate with. You really should be looking for the smartest people you know and collaborate with them as fast as you can. And that was one of the big takeaways. I'm doing that in my business. I'm changing the fact that there was one-to-one leverage, and it's growing as a result. It's amazing what's happening just to watch that happen. So yeah, the weeds, if you watch weeds, if you watch what they do, I think that's one of the big takeaways also from the book is watch what weeds are doing, because they show us how to scale, and they do it beautifully.
Now, weeds have some strategies that you've determined from them, and you actually have a weeds model of scaling, and you have some strategies on that. So let's go into some of what those are and see how that can stimulate our own growth.
Yeah, well, so there is the WEEDS model, which is an acronym. WEEDS stands in for Weed-Inspired Enterprise Expansion and Domination Strategies. So here's the thing: in the WEEDS model, I remember I mentioned that weeds they never do anything without an unfair advantage. Essentially, other plants don't seem to care so much about that, but weeds never do anything without an unfair advantage. So the weeds model is 8 levels of strategy to help you create and accentuate your own unfair advantages. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think about on my property, I've got some giant redwood trees, and I have these blueberry bushes. Now everyone's thinking, blueberry bushes, they're wonderful, the blueberries. Excuse me, I said blueberries. I say that all the time. They're blackberries, and they have these giant thorns. But because they're a weed, they grow, and they will grow around the redwood tree and pines and anything, and just strangle them. And they'll take over unless you cut them back. And it's just amazing when you talk about an unfair strategy. My redwood trees, they don't bother the blueberries. I say that all the time. The blackberries, but the blackberries, they're out there with the unfair advantage, and they're just trying to take over everything. It's the weeds mindset.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Venture capital groups are fond of naming themselves after trees. So, one of the big ones is Sequoia Capital. When you look at a sequoia tree, and actually, when you look at the tree, they're amazing. They are a miracle.
Sequoias are, I believe, the widest or some of the biggest trees in the world.
They are, yeah. They're the biggest trees.
Like 300 feet or so, as well as redwoods. Redwoods are the tallest trees in the world. So it's really interesting that a capital investment firm will take the name of a tree. It's got a lot of significance to it.
Yeah, but what I was going to say, though, is if you look at the distribution map of, let's say, sequoias or even redwoods versus the distribution map of, let's say, dandelions, you can see which one has the better model for spread. Because, sequoias I think they only exist just outside of Fresno in Yosemite. And that's it.
Sierras, yeah.
And so they're the biggest trees in the world, and they don't spread at all. They're not good at spreading at all. That's kind of interesting to me that they would choose those. And redwoods, I think, they're not quite as limited, but I believe they're probably just California coastal.
They are. It's really interesting. If you drive from California to Oregon, just boom, as if there's some barrier there, the redwoods stop and the pines take over.
Yeah. Yep, they don't have enough. They're great trees. They're beautiful trees, but they don't have a great spread strategy, and that leaves them without an unfair advantage. At least in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think if we're going to compare trees, they have their places where the climate is good and they thrive in that particular type of a climate, as opposed to weeds, which seem to be ubiquitous. You see them in the desert, you see them in the rainforest, you see them everywhere, and they seem to be the same type of weed, though I am not a weed specialist. If you're a weed specialist, just, let us know more about weeds. But it seems that the trees are more regional and just have their area where they like to grow, and they like to grow in clusters. If you have, for example, one of these sequoias or redwoods or pines growing by themselves, the odds are, well, they may get blown down by a wind. But when there's a group of them, they're impervious to the wind. So it's really interesting in terms of the cluster model for trees. But weeds, they have a different mindset. They work on something totally different.
Yeah, they do. They're out to gain territory, and they'll do it fiercely. And when you think about those clusters of sequoia trees, maybe it's because all they do is drop the cones at their roots. That's it. They're not going to spread. They're just sort of custom made for not spreading at all.
Yep, I think so, because that's how they grow, and then they grow very thick. Now you have 8 strategies, I believe, from looking through your book on the weeds model. Let's see if we can get into that and stimulate some of our own ideas and growth for our business.
Yeah, well, there are 8 levels. So seed strategy, which is seeds are analogous to anything that causes people to become aware of us and form the intent to transact with us. So marketing and public relations, and it could be many things, actually. A great design. Ferrari does this really well. Great design causes people to just go, wow, look at that. And it spreads. And but anything that causes people to become aware of us and form the intent to transact with us in some way. They could become a client. They could be a follower on social media, whatever it is. They want to follow. They want to do something with us. Seed pod strategy is the next level down. And seed pods are multipliers of seeds. So if you think about the seed pod of a dandelion, it holds the seeds way up in the air because they grow pretty tall, and then it spreads them out in that beautiful geodesic dome ball, which really just maximizes the surface area that is exposed of the seeds to the wind. And so that's analogous to really borrowing the infrastructure of, not the infrastructure, but the reach of others. So in a sense, sorry to say, it's because I'm on your show, this is kind of a seed pod strategy for me. But because I'm reaching your audience, and that's what we need to do. It's part of what we need to do. So the next one down is thorn strategy. And so we know what thorns are. You just talked about them with blackberries. Thorns are area denial or like access denial strategies. They keep intruders out. And, we know what it feels like. You get pricked once by one of those thorns, you're not coming back. You got to avoid it. And so these are strategies that help you repel people who might challenge you in your marketplace. So certainly that's all of your IP that would be registered legally. So it could be trademarks and patents, and but then beyond that, I think it's also just sort of the reputation of being a fierce competitor. I mean, if there's some competitors you just don't want to mess with. Kind of, if we relate it to the news today, China is our competitor, and they're being quite thorny, aren't they? And so, it does cause people to think twice. It causes the people who might challenge you to think twice. It's a kind of an intimidation factor. So that's thorn strategies. We have to have those. We have to protect our IP, or nothing sticks to our businesses. And the next one in the model is segmentation. So if you ever grab a weed in your garden and you're trying to just get rid of it, so you grab it, just got a handful of it and yank, and what you get is just a handful of what you had in your hand, but nothing else. Like the rest of the weeds is still left there. Well, that's usually because they're built in segments, and they're sort of a joint that's so a plug and a joint around it. So when you pull on it, when it's pulled on, just that pops out, but it doesn't pull out the whole weed. It doesn't remove the weed by the roots. And that's a survival. Well, it's a survival strategy, but really it's a survival. I mean, a strategy of limiting risk and damage, and so risk of loss based on disruption. You know, weeds are one of nature's great disruptive forces, but they're also built to be disrupted. They understand that they'll be disrupted as well. And that's what those strategies are about, is minimizing the effect of those disruptions and really just thriving. Actually, they can thrive as a result of those disruptions. So segmentation strategy is looking at how we can do the same thing. And if I might expound on that a little bit, here we are heading into a recession. Now, some might say, no, two quarters of negative growth isn't a recession this time, but whatever, it's a recession. And if we have 3 or 4, then, it's a recession. So, one of the things that we've lived for is they're always looking for disrupted ground. That's where they thrive. So another name for disrupted ground might be yards. Or farmland. And whenever they find that, that's just virgin territory to them to spread and grow and establish themselves and then defend their turf. So all of that's just about disruption is really an interesting topic, because weeds are disruptors. They're just absolutely ready to adapt to any disruption that they encounter. And then there are others. There's rosette strategy and vine strategy and root strategy and soil strategy, meant to help you cultivate more unfair advantages and to form partnerships and alliances. That's the fastest way we're going to grow. And then root strategy is cultivating the whole life force and value of the business in ways that really sort of curating, sort of like the way art is curated in a gallery, but to maximize that value and protect the value. And soil strategy is about fostering the best possible conditions for growth.
You know what some of this is making me think as you're going through this, Stu? I'm thinking of, if I take my business, and this, physically, though you can figure out how to do it online. If I took my business and just set up shop somewhere where I'm not supposed to set up shop, where there's competition or something else, and just kind of muscle my way in a little bit and create a little bit, maybe even a little thorns, maybe not necessarily pain, not create problems, but just kind of push out on my borders. I can just kind of muscle my way into some business and start taking a market share where you already think that there's no room. It's like that dandelion that comes out of that 20, 30 foot high wall on the Santa Monica freeway or whatever, just kind of muscles its way in, and there it is to stay. And it's very tenacious. You pull on it, you're not getting much, as you say, because it's so deeply rooted and entrenched. And as you're going through this, I'm thinking about, when you go into an area, to really cement yourself in, for lack of a better word, really get yourself entrenched in an area, because you may think there's no competition, but if you push your way in, you'll kind of push out the competition a little bit and grab some market share. Not quite by force, though it seems like by force. That's kind of like what I'm getting while I'm thinking about all this from the weed mindset.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, if you watch weeds, and again, I hope that as a result of reading How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed, that people will say, I've just got to watch what the weeds are doing in my yard before I pull them. You can still pull them; they're weeds, but watch what they're doing, and they do fight for turf. They're constantly doing it. Every yard in the world is seeing the same thing. So you can watch what they're doing and get at least gain some inspiration from them, and to just derive strength from them because they are such fierce competitors. But here's another really interesting thing. I think that also points to forming alliances, because we can form alliances with people we compete with. And I would say authors do it all the time. We do it all the time. We're always helping each other. So you can also form alliances with people that I guess you could say are competitors, but they might have, I don't know, they might have clients that need something that you do that's different from what your competitor does. Whatever they also are natural collaborators. Weeds are. And that's why I say that, because if you notice a dandelion in your lawn, you might say, well, okay, there's a dandelion, I'll pull it up. And if it was just one, it wouldn't be much of a factor, but look up and you'll see it's hundreds out there. If you see one, you're just seeing one of an army. And so weeds are telling us in no uncertain terms, you've got to find ways to collaborate with the smartest people you know. So some of those might be your competitors.
I like that. And it kind of reminds me of the adage, there's strength in numbers, because weeds start growing more and more. First there's one, then another, then another. Next thing you know, unless you pull them, they take over and they strangle everything else. So very interesting. Though we don't necessarily want you to strangle others, but it is a very interesting mindset. And part of that also, actually the mindset part, you have a number of mindsets that you feel that the entrepreneur really needs to have in place. So I'd love to go over some of those mindsets. Yeah.
I'm glad you asked, because I didn't want to leave it hanging as this is not the weed mindset we're talking about, sitting around smoking some tubes. That's not it. So when you think about what weeds do, if you watch what they do, if you pull them up, for example, you'll see how quickly, or cut them down, cut them back, you'll see how quickly they grow back. They're very persistent. They're also, I would say, aggressive and urgent and certainly resilient. And I would even say optimistic, which is a weird thing to be ascribing to a weed. I mean, weeds don't have minds. They don't have, or I should say, they don't have brains. So how on earth could something be optimistic? But if you watch the way that they attack their job, I mean, that process of theirs is just programmed into their DNA, and they just run it. Well, they run it like a computer does. They don't let their emotions get in the way. They don't have emotions, so they're not in their way. We have emotions, and they're in our way constantly, but they just focus on what is, and they deal with it right away. So if you cut them back, boom, they're right back to rebuilding. And so that if we define optimism as, let's say, the lack of depression, because depression causes us to not do the things we need to do to recover from something, let's say recover from a loss, or to get something done. They are the opposite of being depressed. They are so gung-ho. They're really, I would call them optimists.
Well, another thing, just a little slightly silly and humorous, in California, the weeds have a very strong lobby community, very strong, so strong that there is a very highly effective weed killer, I won't mention the name, where you could just cut the weed and then take some of this and just put it on the stump, the little stump, and that weed will never grow. Well, that product is so effective, it's not able to be bought in California. It's against the law to buy it in California. You can buy it anywhere in the world. You could have it shipped anywhere in the world except California. So weeds are very strong here in California. They've got a very strong lobby. I don't know how they did it, but they pulled it off. And that just shows you that even though it's something you don't like, it could be so strong that it's impervious to regular laws, rules, protocols, or whatever, because they have a strong lobby.
Yeah, I'll mention it. I'll mention at least the active ingredient. It's glyphosate, and it's in Roundup. I'll mention it because.
Well, actually, since you mentioned that Roundup is allowed, they've got.
Oh, okay, so it's another one.
They've got a monopoly, but they're not as good as something else, which is not allowed. Actually, not allowed in California.
Oh, I'm going to have to ask you after the show what it is. But I have a really cool story about glyphosate and Roundup, because that's just deadly stuff. And I was mentioning that weeds, they run a process that's millions of years old, but it's also able to adapt immediately, or relatively speaking. And so there's one weed that has been showing up in farmland across North America. It's called oddly enough, it's called water hemp. And so, but again, it's not the one you smoke. It's just water hemp. It's just this weed that grows very quickly. It's an annual. And it's really, think about what this is. This is just such a radical approach to strategy and to evolution, because the entire population dies every year. So its longevity, its continuity is through its seeds. And these seeds are, some of them have these useful mutations. And so water hemp, in fact, produces, well, let's say dandelions. We know how, once you have dandelions in your lawn, you're not going to get rid of them. And every one of those plants produces an average of about 15,000 seeds over a 5 to 10 year lifespan. Well, water hemp, by comparison, produces up to 4.8 million seeds per plant. And these plants die off every year. So it's every year, every one of those plants is producing up to 4.8 million seeds. You're never getting rid of that plant. But here are farmers, and they're using herbicides, and they're pretty effective. But water hemp, because it produced so many seeds, and these seeds have these useful, constantly have these useful mutations, you could call it R&D, actually, or certainly evolution, because those then take over, and the mutations in the seeds that were immune to Roundup, that were immune to glyphosate, those are the ones that then propagated. So in 4 years, that plant showed up, and then it was hit with all of these herbicides, and it became immune to Roundup and 70% of all the other herbicides available to farmers to kill weeds. That's incredible. That's the equivalent of that is their evolution. That's sort of the equivalent of let's say our technology. I think that's how we evolve more quickly than we actually evolve as animals, but we certainly evolve through our technology. And it's technology, and that's just fearsome. That's incredible.
That is, I'm really thinking with that to be, because the product that we named, which I cannot name on air, is so highly toxic and poisonous to the environment. We won't use it. We'll go down, one by one and pull these things out by the roots if we have to, but we cannot use a product like that. It's just really too hazardous to the soil. So that's right now what we have to do. But it just shows you back to the weeds, when they can produce so many seeds. It's like saying, heck, come and get me, who cares? Because it can still grow. And if we could get that mindset in our business, that no matter what, maybe it's have multiple set of systems or platforms to get our prospects and to deliver our prospects, so that if something happens or goes down, it doesn't take us out of business. I think that's where we should all look for as an entrepreneur, so that we don't have, even though it takes time to invest our business and grow our business, right? And we usually build a system or a platform or whatever to grow the business. But once we do that, we have to look at multiplying it, mirroring it, having more, because if something happens to that one particular system, we're out of business. I've had that happen too many times, yet it takes time to build one. So you have to build one, but then it's a matter of find another way to build another system that's impervious to what's going on.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is, at least in regard to the weeds model and the weeds, just their model is the unfair advantages that we cultivate in our business. If we don't have unfair advantages, there's no reason for us to be in business, because we're not going to be in business very long, because there are other businesses that do have unfair advantages. And maybe I should give an example. It sort of comes from the book. I want to sell a lot of books, obviously, and I'm going to build a franchise on the back end of the book. And so there's a bunch that I want to do with this book. But I need to spread a lot of seeds, and I need to do this, and I want to create alliances. So here's a great example of that in the book, in How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. One of the things that I mentioned was that I would be starting a new annual award called the Total Weed Award. And that would be and I can't wait to call it. Well, it would be to recognize.
You have to excuse me, Stu. I don't know that I want to be called a weed.
No, I think
we'll
you
make
will.
It a good thing.
When I finish, because this is to recognize weed-like spread and growth. I mean, that's incredible, and it'll be awarded to VCs and entrepreneurs and startups. And they'll be the best of the best. So I can't wait to call these people total weeds, actually. But here's the thing. Here's the wonderful thing about it. I was lucky enough to have Nicola Corsian, the executive director of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, to write the foreword to the book, to How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. And I approached Nicola and I said, I have this award that I need to start building out. Would you be interested in teaming up with me? Because actually, wouldn't it be wonderful if we were able to sell sponsorships in this, and all of the sponsorship money goes to the center, to the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. So it becomes a fundraising event for or device for the center. She loves the idea, so we're going to team up, and so the Total Weed Award will be done in collaboration with the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, which is pretty crazy. And it really certainly gives the award and by extension, the book, because you have to know about the book to understand what the award is about, but it gives all of that a great, great boost as well. And so those are the kinds of alliances that we want to do. And that's also, they're intermingled. So this is also an unfair advantage. Who's going to match that? How do you match that?
I really like that. You're not just selling your business or selling a service, but through alliances, you're growing. And like a weed, you're creating unfair advantages, whether it's the seed strategy or the thorn strategy or whatever the different strategies are. You're growing your business so that no matter what happens, whether something comes to hurt you in one area, you're still growing in the other area. So I really like that a lot. I think that's brilliant. And yeah, it's not done enough at all.
It's not. And I think and I'm also saying though that I'm collaborating. I'm not taking something from the center. We're in an alliance, and as a result, I'm giving something. I mean, that's going to be a fundraiser for them. So I'm bringing value to them as well, which is what alliances should do. So the fact that we're growing together, we end up creating growth for each other is the point. And that's a wonderful way to be. And I'm just in the process again, I was I wrote the book, went through it, read through it and said, oh my God, all these mistakes I'm making in my business. So one of the things I'm also doing is I'm reaching out to all of the top sales thought leaders. Now I've known them for years because I wrote another book, how to get how to get a meeting with anyone. And so I've known a lot of the top sales thought leaders now for years, but I haven't reached out to them to say, hey, look, we should be collaborating here. And one of the ways we could do that is we could use my contact device, my contact campaign system to help some of your sales clients to break through to their top accounts. Well, I don't know why I didn't do this before, but I'm sending one of those contact devices from the system. It's a big cartoon piece, a personalized cartoon piece that gets people to call you back. And so I've sent it out now to all of the thought leaders. I'm saying, let's collaborate. And I'm kicking myself. Why didn't I do this before? Because I am the weed guy. I'm going to stand up for a second. I'm the chief weed officer. I have it on my T-shirt if you're listening. But I mean, I'm the weed guy, and I'm not sending it. I mean, I should be setting up these alliances everywhere, and that's what I'm doing, and that's what it takes to grow like a weed.
And I'm going to help you on some of those. We're going to talk about that off air. And once again, we talked about how to grow like a weed with Stu Heinecke, and you can find him at stuheinecke.com. Again, StuHeinecke.com. Stu, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us today. You've stimulated a lot, and there's so much more to think about. Guys, get the book, check it out, How to Grow Like a Weed. Stu, thank you so much for all this.
Tony, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with me while I featured an elite entrepreneur who took his vision to reality. We discussed how to grow like a weed with Stu Heinecke. We talked about some really interesting things here, comparing and contrasting weeds with growing a business. We talked about, well, the different scaling strategies that can help your business grow. We talked about the weeds model of scaling, and there's 8 strategies in that. We talked about the mindsets for an entrepreneur to really get out there, and there's 6 different mindsets. We talked about a number of them. We talked about how to overcome adversity and challenges, and so many other points. I like to ask you, what did we discuss that resonated with you? What's your weeds story? Tell us. And please remember supporting the show with a nice review on Apple Podcasts, as well as comments on the video platforms, should you run into those. And most important, share this with a few friends. It's all about friends helping friends, and they're going to appreciate that you shared the show. All right, let's use this and let's help you move on your journey to success. Thanks, and remember, just take action. Success awaits those who persevere and remain steadfast despite the odds. Sow good seeds, do good deeds, and join me on the next episode of The Tony DUrso Show.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's edition of The Tony DUrso Show with his key influencers. Be sure to tune in again next Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Influencers channel.